So I had news that my homeopathy teacher, Misha Norland, died. A great soul, a radiant being, a profound person who was a great support in my life at an important time. And so I wish to dedicate this talk to him and use this as an opportunity to address something which is absolutely critical. It's what I actually believe is the key to enlightenment, is the key to cutting through the noise and finding some traction on the road so you can become independent from external forces and work with yourself, on yourself, by yourself to become enlightened, to become fully enlightened. This is the key to full enlightenment. In my opinion, of course, any number of people will disagree with me, and it's not for me to decide, because essentially it's for you to decide whether what I say is true or not in your case. All I can do is talk about what has worked for me in my case. So I don't wish to imply that this is an ideology that should be imposed on the world, but it is the mechanism with which the mind operates, and it's the mechanism through which we can release the mind from its unintended and habitual habit of creating suffering in our case. So what is it? I'm going to start with a story, and this is the story I tell again and again because I reflect on it again and again because of its significance and its profundity, and it's the fact that it applies to me as much as anybody else, and the usefulness that I've derived from this story. It's very, very brief. And it comes from scriptures, comes from early Pali Canon. And in this story, the Buddha is walking through a forest with a handful of monks. And he bends down and he picks up a handful of leaves. And he says, which is more, all the leaves and all the trees in this forest, or the handful of leaves that I hold in my hand? And the monks say to him, Lord, there's a lot more leaves in all the trees in the forest than there are leaves in your hand. And the Buddha then says to them, so it is that which I've seen and understood can be compared to all the leaves and all the trees in the forest. But that which you need to know for your own liberation, for the liberation of your heart, can be compared to the handful of leaves that I hold in my hand. The reason this is so important is because there are so many things that are fascinating and true, that are deserving of our understanding, deserving of conversation, that have value to society, value to us, value to others, that are also extremely interesting and fascinating, that can really occupy the mind and can appear to be in some way related to our spiritual progress. But what the Buddha is saying, actually, despite the fact they're true, despite the fact they're fascinating, despite the fact they may be of great value in some respects, they're not actually relevant. Nada, not relevant at all to the liberation of your heart, to the liberation of your being. The key to the liberation of your heart, the liberation of your being, is much more narrow. It's much more precise. It's a specialist piece of knowledge. And this specialist piece of knowledge has to do with the way we relate to dis-ease. Now, we're all experiencing disease to one degree or another. If you don't believe that is the case, just sit down in a chair for an hour and see if there's any squirming of any sort, even if it's because you've got a scratchy, itchy nose, or you feel too warm, or you feel too cold, or you need to go to the bathroom. There's always some semblance of disease, but the fundamental disease, as I've mentioned before in other videos, is the sense of my life could and should perhaps amount to more than just this. There is this something more that I need to add, that needs to be added, because even though things could be good, things could be really, really good, Could have a beautiful wife, a beautiful house, lots of money in the bank, beautiful children, be handsome, be full of youthful health. Even at that moment, it's passing. In fact, that perfection never fully lands. It never fully arrives. It's always like sand that is slipping through our hands, and we sense that. We know that. We know we can't quite grasp it. We can touch it, we think, but as soon as we touch it, it passes, and it's transitory. So there's always this pathos, this sense of, even at the moment of complete perfection, even at the moment of orgasm, it's passing. It doesn't stick. It doesn't stay. How many beautiful moments have you had in your life that are perhaps not even memories? They just pass. Everything keeps passing, keeps passing. So what is that about? What we do know is that we share this sense of desire for more. We all have that sense. I mean, of course, one expression of it is greed. One way we try to resolve it is greed, having more than we need. I mean, I'm as bad at this as anybody. I've got more clothes than I need. I've got more shoes than I need. I've got lots more of all sorts of things than I need. But an expression in the sense of Dhamma well lived is knowing what is enough, because in a sense, if the fundamental appetite for perfection is satiated, then that drive to consume basically becomes redundant, and we are then more about using resources, using the things of the world as and when needed, but not because we're trying to fill a hole that is not being filled, a bottomless pit that is not being filled. So, what is this mechanism? Why is this a talk that I want to dedicate to Misha? Why am I taking this opportunity to address this point? Because there's certainly in the Buddhist tradition, there is a point that the Buddha describes that has to do with karma, in fact, action. Karma as action. And we're up to action all of the time because we're constantly making choices. All you need to do again is just sit still for an hour or two in a chair, and you begin to see, pushing and pulling, trying to make things go the way you want. And the pushing and pulling has to do with my way as opposed to the way it is. And so we're constantly trying to enforce my way, even if we're not conscious of it. We certainly become conscious of it if we put some restraints on you and you can no longer follow your way. Then your way starts to become self-evident because of the frustration that you feel when you can't fulfill those desires to manipulate, change, modify, experience in ways that you feel you have a right to. So, the key then to enlightenment is to understand the relationship we have to this felt sense. First of all, to wake up to, or to become honest enough and embrace the fact that we don't feel 100% satisfied, just as the stone said, I can't get no satisfaction. I try and I try and I try and I try, but I still can't get no satisfaction. This is not unique to the Rolling Stones. This is a condition of unenlightenment. This is what unenlightenment is the feeling of not being fully satisfied. No matter what you have, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter how great it is, there's still another thing, a missing piece that could make it even better. And so just waking up to that, just beginning to embrace that, not seeing it as a pathology, not judging it as something that, is a problem just in your case, recognizing this is a universally shared predicament. This is something we all have in common. This is, in fact, a key to enlightenment, a key to awakening, beginning to notice this, beginning to awaken to it, to begin to accept that dissatisfaction into consciousness without turning it into a problem, but rather becoming curious about the possibilities that may be inherent in further understanding what this dynamic of dissatisfaction is about. And that's what this video is for, is to begin to alert you to the fact that there is a great possibility here that we are missing because we are so habituated to just reacting to the experience of dissatisfaction. It's just a way of life, and it's accepted generally by everybody that it's acceptable to pursue release from this sense of dissatisfaction in any way we choose, except, and we are free to do that. And I'm not suggesting that we take away that freedom. But what I will say is that most of the ways, all of the ways, in fact, that we try to pursue release from this satisfaction, unless it's the right way, will fail us. Eventually they will fail us, because this is just not hardwired into nature. This, as the purpose for this teaching, this teacher, this grain of sand in the oyster that is going to give rise to the pearl. If you don't let that irritation do its work, the pearl will not emerge. And the pearl is what is going to emerge sooner or later. So that's the first step, is just to stop, accept the feeling of dissatisfaction, and not make a big song and a dance out of it. Woe is me. Big deal. In fact, what you're experiencing is a universal sensation or universal feeling. And contrary to appearances, it's the beginning of something that is truly extraordinary, beyond your wildest dreams. This is the beauty of it, is that actually the gold is in the mud. The gold is in the dark, is in the earth. So how do we get that glittering gold to begin to emerge? Well, we understand the karma that we are creating in relationship to that felt sense of dissatisfaction that is pretty much ever present. And the karma is the action we take in relationship to it, the things that we do in relationship to it. And the Buddha made it very clear. There are three things. There's basically four options, actually. But there's one of those options is the key that brings about release. And he doesn't actually mention that in this case because he's pointing to the habit that is obstructive. And the habit that is obstructive, there are three habits that we have that are obstructive. So wherever you feel dissatisfaction, you're up to one of these three things. You're either trying to get past it. You're either unconsciously thinking, I don't want it to be like this. It would be better if it was like this. Therefore, I'm going down the pub. Therefore, I'm going to the fridge. Therefore, I'm going to pick up that magazine. You want to get past it without noticing that at that moment, there's a felt sense of dissatisfaction that we're not happy about and we want to modify. And they call this bhava tanha, the desire to become something other than the way it is. So we're trying to just get past it. And it's always this kind of like leaning forward to the next thing. And there's when that builds momentum, then you get this rushing that you see in the world. This is why the world is so speedy. Because we're trying to speed past the way it is to get to a way it is that is better than the way it is now. Speed is one of the real characteristics of that bhava tanha. The other thing you could be doing in relationship to it is just trying to kill it off and bury it in some way, throttle the life out of it. And that could be just by numbing out, numbing out of the body, absorbing more and more into the head, into the abstractions where we are less aware, less conscious of the sensations that are source of this ease, this discomfort, and turning that into a place where we dwell a lot of the time, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, basically being elsewhere. And so we're building a habit such as that, which is trying to get away from. So that's one habit, one response, trying to get away from, suppress. Another habit, another response is try to get past it. So bhava tanha, vibhava tanha, the desire to become, the desire to get rid of, fundamentally. At any given moment, we're making these choices and reinforcing these karmas by repeating those reactions again and again and again, moment to moment. And the third response we have to this felt sense of dissatisfaction is the desire to resort to sensory distraction through our eyes, through our ears, through our nose, through our tongue, through our genitals, whatever it is. Sensation is to do with the six senses of whatever kind that we feel will modify the way it is now and bring about an improvement, resorting to any form of sensory distraction that we feel is going to add more to the situation than it is now, is again another reaction, another form of karma, a choice that we make. Because, if you get up and go to the fridge to get a piece of chocolate cake, it's a choice you make. Next time you feel like getting up to make a piece of chocolate cake, you can say, I feel like getting up to get a piece of chocolate cake, but I'm not going to go to the fridge for half an hour. Rather, I'm going to stay with the sensation. And that's called sila, that's called restraint. So you contain yourself. In that containment, that you then begin to amplify the felt sense that is actually the case. And it may be some sort of gnawing anxiety, for example. And then you stay with that sensation. And then you can observe all your mental habits around it, all the karmas, trying to get past it, trying to throttle it, trying to distract yourself through sensory absorption, just trying to modify it. Because, who wants to settle for things not being better than they could be? Who wants to settle for that? That's mediocrity. But it's not mediocrity, because all of the pursuing of habits that we do through senses, through becoming, through trying to suppress, get rid of, build unhappiness fundamentally. The true potential for happiness that we all sense and want and have a birthright to realize can't burgeon, can't come into being unless we start to unpack this naughty little point, unless we get to this handful of leaves, begin to notice in every moment that actually this is going on one way or another. You're either creating more kamatana, creating vibhavatana, or creating the karma of resorting to certain distractions, like, could be chocolate cake, could be wine, could be switching on the TV. None of these things are bad in and of themselves. They're fine if they're conscious choices, but if they're choices that are born out of unconscious reaction, then you're building karma. It's as simple as that. So we're not saying any of this stuff is bad, but this is not a guilt-tripping exercise. It's an exercise in pointing out that it's the relationship to these actions, whether they're being done freely or whether they're being done compulsively, that is what's important. So what happens then if you stay with this sensation of dissatisfaction? What happens? You don't follow the bhavatanha, which is the desire to become. You don't follow the vibhavatana, which is the desire to destroy. You don't follow the kamatana, which is the desire to absorb into sensory distraction. But you stay with the sensation. what happens? Well, it's a slow but absolutely inevitable kind of nuclear reaction. What happens is your mind will fundamentally stop. The mechanisms that give rise to the impression of meanness and my preferences will stop. And there'll be a flowering, a burgeoning of unfettered, unbound consciousness, unbound awareness. So when we follow the habitual patterns, awareness becomes bound in the movements of attention trying to get past, attention trying to get rid of, attention trying to distract. When those mechanisms, when those karmas become redundant, when those karmas start to cease, then what starts to happen is you start to see the purified mind, the mind that is purified. And one of the aspects of that purified mind is bliss. So, bliss replaces the kind of background grayness that most of us are suffering from. Luminosity replaces the darkness of the mind and the busyness of the mind. Stillness replaces the seesawing of the mind, the monkey mind that is swinging from one branch to the other, constantly trying to find release and relief from disease. Understanding arises because you begin to understand the actual key to the universe, the key to human life, and begin to enjoy the direction of travel that takes you on. And then the heart begins to ignite, as I've said, with felt sense of compassion, because when the heart begins to become purified of those karmic habits and aligned with the way it is, it opens to that sense of dis-ease, embraces it, and then in that act of intimacy, the disease surrenders itself in a way. It's like it swoons into the heart, and it becomes one with intrinsic well-being. And then this becomes a forever, a never-ending journey, you could say, into increasing depth and enrichment, and enriching of your soul, enriching of your spiritual being. And all of this comes about just from understanding this mechanism, this mechanism that is concerned with this handful of leaves, which is, looking at the fact, the truth, with honesty, that things are okay, but they could be more okay. Catch the sense of that, and then with stillness, and it could just be sitting in a chair. Just sit in a chair and stay with it. And look, it's just not going to give you all of those fruits that I described like that instantly. Not unless you've got a very light karmas, not unless you've only been doing this for an extremely short period of time. Because, if you've been doing this for a long period of time, maybe even lifetimes, then of course it's going to have momentum. So you have to then let that momentum unwind. And this is why the Buddha also emphasized being patient. You have to be patient. Badhus say it's good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. You may not feel, cellular sort of ignition and purification and magnification of awareness throughout your entire body instantly, but you just might feel a little more settled, a little more real, a little more, aha, that's that that feels substantial in some way. I would sometimes go through periods of meditation in the monastery that while during the meditation it'd be an intense endurance. It's just like a total grind. I mean, why would anybody volunteer for this? A lot of body pain, shoulders, neck, just waiting for the bell to ring. Okay, it's hours past. Sometimes the abbot would run past the hour, go in, hour 10 minutes, hour 20 minutes, reach that point where you're being the good monk, you're sitting there, and then after a while, that commitment to being the good monk just breaks, it just cracks and go, Jesus Christ, for fuck's sakes, I want out of this. And, this is the beginning, you're beginning to get real. You can see this with the young monks, very idealistic, and they have a picture of how they should be. And they're sitting like this, absolutely perfect. And, you can tell really just by looking at how someone is being present to themselves, how free they are, how released they are. But, the young ones they're often, living out an ideal that it's only going to last for so long, because eventually, because it's contrived, because it's not born out of what is really the case for them, it's an understandable, but nevertheless, temporary contrivance that will eventually fall to pieces, and in time they will become more real and sit in a more natural way. Because once you get that ignition of being that comes about from just being with the way it is, and the way it is also releasing its substance in return, its essence, which is also being, then we don't need to contrive any sort of support. It comes by grace and such. It's just a manifestation of grace. It's just intrinsic and is therefore effortless. You don't do meditation. Meditation does you. You don't do sitting. The sitting does you. You don't do understanding. The understanding just does you. And the more confidence you have in that, the more you just relax into that, accepting in recognition and understanding that is just the way it is. And that is a very liberating perspective. So, just going to sum up here. Right now, there is an impulse operative in you that wishes to modify the way it is, to make your life better than it is in this moment. And just learn to become aware of the feeling of that impulse, and accept that is an enlightenment factor. In fact, this is a key moment. If you can just acknowledge that without pretending that you're more okay than you really are, or less okay than you really are, just noticing how you really, really are, staying with it. Then begin to notice how the mind squirms, the three forms of squirming. To get past it, to throttle the life out of it, or to distract yourself from it entirely through sensory impressions. Just start to notice how that is going on in truth, and that is really the underlying fertilizer for the impression of meanness. Notice that, and trust me that if you can become real in this way, all sorts of new opportunities, new vistas will begin to open. And so this is what the Buddha really was teaching. This is the essence of the Buddha. Now, this is not an intellectually fascinating message. It's really quite simple. It's very, what we would call uju, very straight and direct to the point. There's not a lot of room for discussing this fascinating thing and this other fascinating thing and using all sorts of highly elaborate language and philosophical ideas and going on and on and on, blah, 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 which there's a lot of. There's a huge amount of discussion around spirituality without getting to this nerve. This is the funny bone. This is the real nerve. This is the point that really matters. This is where the action is. Just here. Don't care whether it's Sufi, Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, Christian contemplatives, Russian Orthodox. Don't it all has to converge for you on this pinpoint. So I dedicate this to Misha Norland and leave this for your consideration.